Good morning, everybody. I want to thank everyone for being here. We're going to go ahead and get started here in just a second. And let's see, that should be a little better. There we go. Thanks, Rebecca. All right, so let me begin with a couple of things. First, I want to welcome everyone to the kickoff of our Metro Crime Initiative, version 2, this summer. We started this program last year in response to, all the calls for fixes and efforts to deal with the gun violence that is facing our community. And we had some. We'll just give us a moment. I'm sure this happens from time to time, as we know, at our facilities and parks and whatnot. So as we look forward, we know that we were able to accomplish a little bit last year, some things that meant a lot to some people, but we have to do much, much more. And so we are back at it again, and we're going to keep fighting. And when I say we, there's a long list of folks who care about this issue who are going to speak today, and there's even a longer list of folks who are going to participate in this program again. So I'm not going to share too much beyond that, because we want to start off, I think, with a very obvious and relevant voice as to why we're doing this summer, and also why we're here today at this location, the very location where that terrible act of gun violence took one of our youth at Washington Middle School. And we're going to hear from Pamela Herndon, as well as some family members. So with that, let me start with more on that specific issue with respect to the Metro crime challenges. And so let me invite Representative Pamela Herndon up. Representative.
Good morning. I'm honored this morning to be able to talk about what we are here for, and looking at introducing Mayor Keller to you in a more formal manner. However, before doing so, I want to bring to your attention the symbolism of why we are meeting here today next to Washington Middle School, nearly 1 year after the tragedy that struck this community. Young Benny Hartgrove lost his life in a senseless violence gun incident right here at this park. Every sudden death is tragic. And as we've seen over and over in this country, the loss of a child to gun violence affects us all. Benny had such a bright future. The day he died, he was trying to resolve a dispute among his classmate colleagues using nonviolent protocols when he himself became the victim of violence. He was trying to make a difference. We can't simply accept these tragedies as a new way of life. As a member of the legislature, I am fighting to keep gun arms out of the hands of children, because like Benny, I want to make a difference. We all do, don't we? I introduced the Benny Hartgrove bill to require gun owners to secure their weapons, and I appreciate Mayor Tim Keller making the Benny Hartgrove Gun Safety Act a priority within the Metro Crime Initiative. I am also glad to know that the mayor will host a dedicated session to gun violence. As a community, we must have the courage to discuss these issues comprehensively and openly. We cannot give up. We must continue the goal for safe schools and safe communities, not only for Benny Hartgrove, but for all children who are counting on our leadership to keep them safe. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to introduce an incredible leader, a man with a vision for safety for our communities, who will announce the plan to continue the Metro Crime Initiative. He is none other than our own wonderful Mayor Tim Keller.
I tell you, an introduction from Representative Herndon is always awesome. So I feel ready for the day and the challenges ahead. Thank you so much, Representative. We wanted just to kind of give you an overview up front, so that was our sort of official kickoff. And I'm going to MC us through this ceremony and just provide a few opening remarks. But I do want to recognize some folks who are here. Many are speaking, so I'll introduce you as you come up. But some folks who are here that we certainly want to recognize. Our City Councilor Renee Grout is here. Councilor, thank you for joining. Give us a little wave. Thank you for being a part of this. She's a new councilor, so this is her first round at Metro Crime Initiative. Thank you for being here. Jeremy Romero from the Governor's Office. Jeremy, thank you so much for being here. As well as, we know we've got Lisa Cedillo-White. I think I saw our Deputy County Manager here. Lisa, thank you. Our Vice Chancellor from UNMH, which plays a key role in a lot of the behavioral health, Dr. Larson is also here. I think he was. Dr. Larson, thank you. There you are. And we also know we've got Moms Demand Action. You can't miss them in the red shirts. Thank you for all that you do. And also from our Public Defender's Office, Ben Bauer, who's a long stalwart. I think I saw Ben as well here too. Thank you for being here, Ben. And I also want to recognize Judge Castillo Dowler's here. Thank you, Judge. This means a lot to have the judicial branch here. Thank you so much. We also know that Holland Kastrom, U.S. Attorney's Office, also represented. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, and I think also I want to mention Mariah Matthews. Is she here? Representative Matthews? Marion Matthews. Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's like as if we've just met, right? So thank you all for being here. So let me begin, because there's, again, many speakers that we want to hear from today. But this is sort of, you know, in some ways it's almost what you do at different sessions when you're trying to deal with grief and trauma. Meaning that I want to start with acknowledging the challenge that we have. One of the biggest outcomes of the Metro Crime Initiative last year was acknowledging that we have a criminal justice system in New Mexico that is just not functioning right. It does not work systematically for so many in that system, whether it's victims, whether it's individuals in the incarceration system, or it's individuals trying to get out. There are points all along the way that have significant challenges. That was step one with the Metro Crime Initiative. Step two was acknowledging that we all then have a role to play in fixing it. And we have to own that responsibility. There is no one speaker up here who can fix or change what has happened in our community. There is no one example, no one particular policy that is going to move the needle. But what we learned and what we understand about our criminal justice system is that if we each pull our own weight, that's the individual accountability. I've got to do my job as mayor. EPD has to do their job as a police department. But every other piece in that chain, from the courts to the criminal justice system, to the detention centers, to the attorneys involved, all of the above have to do their part as well. That is the only way we are going to repair a broken criminal justice system. That is the starting place. It is a shared responsibility to fix this system, but it's a responsibility that we each own individually at every level. And this is also why we're so grateful to have our legislators here, because we know that it also impacts City Council, it impacts County Commission, it impacts our state legislature. And again, what I'm so grateful for is at least everyone coming together and acknowledging that we are all part of the solution. And I will continue to say the same thing that we said in the legislature last year, which is that if you are an elected official or you are involved in the criminal justice system and you cannot point to what you are doing differently to fix the criminal justice system, you are not part of the solution. That is what we need, and that includes myself. If I can't tell you that every time you see me, then I should be held accountable for that. So that's on us. But what we've got to do together, right, is understand how each piece of that system works with each other and how our individual steps can then support each other. How I can support our DA, how I can support our courts, how I can support our governor's office in our legislature. That is the question I have to answer. And that's what the Metro Crime Initiative sessions are all about, so that each person in that chain of the criminal justice system, that arena of the criminal justice system, can answer that question. What are we doing to fix the broken system? That's what the Metro Crime Initiative is all about. So we are grateful that last time we had about 5 out of 9 policies that actually got passed. It was ankle monitoring data. We got $9 million for violence intervention. We did get some stronger laws on gun crime. So we had a noticeable difference. And we also, by the way, had a governor on board and a lot of legislators with the Metro Crime Initiative. That was also new last session. But we also know there is a whole host of initiatives, dozens, that did not pass. We also know that we have to come up with much more concrete solutions when it comes to drugs and behavioral health, when it comes to domestic violence and the fact that 38% of the women and 33% of the men experience intimate partner violence in their lifetime, and that is often one of the leading causes of then homicide associated with domestic violence after. So there's so much work to be done, but we're going to be reconvening over the course of the summer in 3 different sessions. I'll talk about the next steps at the end, and we're going to make sure that we can put forth real, actionable solutions that will make a difference in the short term. This is not about report writing. It is not about studying and analysis. It is about action, and it is about change. And that's why I'm so grateful for everyone who's here joining us today to renew that commitment. Now, with that, let's hand it over to our county commissioner, who's been at the forefront of a lot of this for a long time. We're grateful to have her with us here today, County Commissioner Debbie O'Malley. Commissioner?
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. I'm standing in for our chair, Adrian Barboa. She has a scheduling conflict and couldn't make it, but I'm happy to be here. First, I'd like to thank Representative Herndon for all your work on the last session to address tragedies like what happened here in Washington Middle School. By the way, I went to Washington Middle. Well, not middle school then, it was a junior high. And thank you, Mayor Keller, for bringing us all together today. We're not going to tackle the serious problems affecting our community without working closely and intentionally on effective approaches and strategies to prevent gun violence and move the needle with regards to drug addiction, behavioral health, and domestic violence. Working together, the city, county, along with the other partners represented here, and several others that we hope to bring to the table, we can combine our resources and confront these problems with common resolve. As a former Albuquerque City Councilor, I know that when the mayor and council work together, we can have a real positive impact on critical challenges facing our community. I know that Councilor Carissa Pena and Councilor Benton were going to be, I think they were, well, they're not here, but they were going to talk today. Okay, hopefully they're on their way. Okay, they're going to be speaking later, and I'm glad to see Councilor Grout here as well. Here, along with other colleagues from other agencies and members of law enforcement who are on the front lines of dealing with those affected by violent crime. I commend the mayor, the city, for being inclusive and collaborative with advocates, the judicial branch, and community members to come up with an effective, tangible plan to make Albuquerque and Bernalillo County safer for all our families. Most of all, for kids like Benny Hargrove, who, like all kids, just wanted a chance to learn and grow up in his community. Let's do this for Benny and the thousands of other kids and families who deserve the right to live in a safe, supportive community. Thank you.
And now we're also joined by our District Attorney, Raul Torres. Raul?
So I want to compliment the mayor and the leaders at the local level for convening the Metro Crime Initiative for a second time. I think, from my perspective, it is frankly a little sad that we continue to struggle with the issues that we have struggled with for so long in this community. But I am also encouraged by the fact that members of the legislature are here today. I want to thank Representative Herndon, Representative Matthews, Representative Chasey for being here But I also want to urge them, as they take the lessons of this community to Santa Fe and they hear from the stakeholders, I would ask them to encourage other members of the legislature to listen, to attend, to participate in these sessions. Because ultimately, too much of this system is integrated with other institutions that operate at the state level and require state level attention and resources, both at the judicial level but also in the legislature. And I know that we are talking about this as the Metro Crime Initiative, but we need the engagement of leaders across the entire state. And in the last 30-day session, I think a number of policy initiatives were put forward, and some of those were adopted, but too many, frankly, were left unattended. And it's my hope that in coming into a new 60-day session, the legislature will have the benefit of the collective response and recommendations of all the stakeholders who are present here today. I'm often asked about what I think we need to do to prevent crime and build a safer community in Albuquerque. And oftentimes we focus on the immediate and urgent needs of stopping gun violence or dealing with fentanyl or overdose deaths or things of that nature. But I want to highlight something else that I think is enormously consequential for future generations. Eric Griego is here today and has been long advocating for big strategic investments in traumatized children, in destabilized households, in broken homes and broken families. And ultimately, what I can tell you is that the long-term solution to many of the things that we see, whether it's juvenile violence or addiction, has its root in early childhood trauma. And the legacy of New Mexico and its future will be determined by the extent to which we're able to identify those children. 75% of the boys and 87% of the girls in juvenile detention in Bernalillo County have suffered 5 or more ACEs, 5 or more. That means they are the victim of sexual assault, abuse, neglect, mistreatment of the type that most people in attendance here, except for those in law enforcement, can barely comprehend. The root of our crime problem goes back generations. And what we are witnessing now is the failure to invest and identify broken homes and broken families 15 and 20 and 25 years ago. So I urge you, as we take up the challenge of dealing with the immediate needs and the immediate issue of gun violence and the issues that I know we have to tackle, we can't lose sight of our obligation to save this community 10, 15, and 20 years into the future. That's going to require sustained leadership by the legislature, sustained engagement from people who understand the impact of trauma, and I hope that we can keep that in our perspective as well. If we do that, we can have a collective impact and really create an environment and a community that we can all be proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, District Attorney. Councilor Clarissa Pena has been a wonderful supporter of this project. She actually told us that she's not going to be able to quite make it today, and we'll see if our chairman shows up. I bet, and I know he also is running late. But I want to, just for those of you following along in the agenda, we're going to keep proceeding with our speakers. And so next, truly is, the individual who's on the front line, in everything crime-related in the city by job definition, but also for his entire career. And so let's bring up our Chief of Police, Harold Medina.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, everybody, for being here today. Today we're going to talk about something that we know. The criminal justice system is still broken. We've made progress. This isn't about blaming judges individually. This isn't about blaming prosecutors individually. This isn't about blaming police officers and saying that they're not doing their job or that corrections doesn't have personnel out there to work. This is about us working as a community to fix the issues that we're facing, that we've not just faced last year, that we've faced for the 25, 26 years that I've worn this uniform. These are problems that are reoccurring that just seem sometimes not to get fixed. As Mayor said, during the last Metro Crime Initiative, there was success. We now, GPS is reported to law enforcement. the state legislature funded more resources for our victims, but there is more work to do. In the spring of 2022, I was summoned to Santa Fe, and I had to face the fact that there was an LFC report that stated that law enforcement wasn't ensuring there are consequences for our homicide offenders, and that law enforcement had to do a better job to ensure that there's accountability for those people who commit the most heinous crime in our community. The Albuquerque Police Department had already taken steps and had self-identified that there were problems within our investigative section, and I'm happy to say that in the last 6 months I've seen more homicide arrests by the Albuquerque Police Department than any other 6-month period in the history of our police department. We are at nearly 100% clearance rate for homicides within the city of Albuquerque. We're doing our part to ensure that there's proactive policing. Our statistics have almost doubled per week in what our field service officers are doing. Our felony arrests doubled. Our traffic stops have doubled. We will continue to work hard to ensure that we're doing everything we can to support the community. But those same state legislators that asked us to step up to the plate and ensure that we had to do what we had to as law enforcement as our role, I'm now asking you to realize we're 6 months later and homicides aren't going down. We still need to fix some of the processes within the criminal justice system, and I'm now challenging you to accept the responsibility that I accepted as police chief to get the investigation portions of the Albuquerque Police Department moving forward. They are not new problems. They're age-old problems. Domestic violence, drug use, gun violence. Since 2019, we've seen an increase in firearm use related to our homicides. 66% of our homicides in 2019 utilized a firearm. This year, over 90% of our homicides are involving a firearm. The toll in human lives, 47 people have lost their lives this year. That's 47 grieving families, just like the families from the years before that have lost a loved one to firearm violence and repeat offenders and criminals who simply should not be walking the streets of Albuquerque. All over the country, fentanyl has quickly become one of our most top drugs. It's very easy to deal, it's very easy to obtain, and lately we've seen huge arrests that the Albuquerque Police Narcotics units are conducting to fight this crime and the spread of fentanyl. A few weeks ago, a patrol officer stopped a vehicle and detained a man who attempted to flee. The man turned out to be wanted. We've talked about this. The individual was a convicted felon, had a stolen firearm in his possession, which made him a felon in possession of a firearm, over 1,000 fentanyl pills in his possession. And what did he tell the officer? I need a gun because of the amount of drugs that I'm carrying. We need to change this. We need to ensure that these individuals like this do not get that second chance to be out in the community, putting people in danger and killing somebody over $20. And it's going to take strong will for us to recognize there is a line in the sand and violent people need to stay in jail. Later that same night, narcotic detectives and DEA agents seized over 4,000 fentanyl pills from another drug dealer. When we started the Metro Crime Initiative last year, we noted how many low-level drug deals involved guns and how too often murders were the result of these low-level drug deals. We also recognize that we have problemed areas within the city. Motels and smoke shops have been at the forefront of our fight against violent crime and illegal narcotics dealings. Last month, we conducted an operation at the Bow and Arrow Lodge on East Central. Numerous complaints about illegal drug sales and criminal activity. Detectives served a search warrant on motel rooms and later learned the motel rented the same rooms to the same suspects we had previously been working on and who had been arrested. 15 people were arrested on felony charges. In the month of May, police responded to 23 calls for service at the Bow and Arrow Lodge. There was a hotel in the foothills that resulted in 57 calls for service in the month of May. One of the things that we're going to be doing different this Metro Crime Initiative is we're asking locally what we also can do. We're not just asking Santa Fe and the state legislature to help us. I'm asking our city councilors, help us create a nuisance abatement process that helps us close these hotels more quicker, to put a solid plan together on how we're going to address these repeat places. Every single one of us knows there's places in Albuquerque that more crime is being committed, but there are also specific locations and businesses that are more worried about the $40 room they're going to rent than what's best for our community and somebody's life. So I'm hoping that not only in Santa Fe can we create a system that keeps people that need to be incarcerated in jail, but locally we can force business owners to start doing the right thing. And if not, the city of Albuquerque can move on their property and ensure that we do everything we can to stop the violence in this city that they're responsible for in a way because of how they conduct their business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chief. And now we're very fortunate and grateful to be joined by Benny Hargrove's mother. Colette Wise is here, and I know we're very familiar with that story and what happened to her son. But let's give her the respect and the attention to what she has to say about what needs to change in our state. Colette?
Good morning. Sadness. This is a feeling and an emotion that my family and I have been going through for almost the last year since the tragic death of my son Benny. As you know, my son Benny was murdered here at Washington Middle School in August of last year because of senseless gun violence from another middle school classmate. Benny, like many others, was a victim of the increased gun violence and school violence that has been steadily rising throughout our nation. Now, the nation is mourning the recent passings of 19 children from another senseless gun violence at schools in Uvalde, Texas. My family understands the pain and sadness that those of Uvalde victims' families are going through. That is why my family and I agree that something must be done to protect schools, to protect children in our schools. We have pushed for common sense solutions of Benny Hargrove Gun Safety Act and support the other measures being promoted here today to protect the school children. We never want to see another family go through the sadness that my family went through with losing Benny. We must stop this senseless gun violence and protect the young children. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Colette. Her voice began to be heard at the legislature, and I just want to emphasize what Representative Herndon said. You know, that bill I don't even think got out of committee, right? Got out of two committees. Didn't even get out of one chamber. This is part of the issue. If you're against something, vote how you want to vote. But the fact that we are not allowing these different debates to go through the full process is one of the huge reasons why these antiquated laws are still on the books, or why stronger laws are not on the books. And so I do want to encourage not only the people who are in favor of this, but if you're against it, show up and just vote the way you want to vote. Do not silence the committees. Do not bury this in process. Make sure that this is a public decision. That's what we're going to say every single time when these initiatives come up in the legislature. Now, with a perspective on the emergency rooms that end up seeing the effects of this, obviously right after the incidents, and we've heard some of them talk about this before, about the notion that gun violence from their perspective is actually a public health issue, and it's more of essentially a disease that is afflicting us. We want to provide that perspective with you as well. So from UNMH, Dr. Brandon Warwick. Doctor?
Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here. I think I'm going to just start with some grim statistics. During COVID, we have seen an explosion of overdose deaths across the country, across New Mexico, to historic levels that we've never seen, almost a 30% increase from the year prior. Most of that, as already been mentioned, is led by fentanyl. Fentanyl is very cheap to manufacture. Let me change my terminology, extremely cheap to manufacture, and there's a huge profit margin in it. And it is very difficult, despite best efforts of our law enforcement, to stop. I think it's time that medicine starts stepping up and helping with that. At UNM, we're working hard to increase the capacity for patients who have an opioid use disorder to get treatment, both here in Albuquerque as well as the state. At this point in time, if you feel that you have an opioid use disorder, you can present to UNMH Hospital or Presbyterian Hospital and ask for help. And in the emergency departments have been now trained and up and running to help with that. Going also forward, I applaud the mayor, the people standing behind me for wanting to work together. Quoting Mayor Keller, this isn't something that's going to go away overnight, and we're going to have to work together. It didn't get this way overnight, and I believe that true teamwork is going to help out and provide solutions that we have yet to be seen. One example of this is at MDC currently, we're offering methadone and buprenorphine as well as other addiction services to people who are incarcerated. This is something that has been being asked at a federal level under now 3 different presidents, and yet is really slow to be adopted. Here in Albuquerque, we are leading the way. The original research that's coming out of the science is also starting to evolve. So I am really proud to be here and to be part of a system where we're putting things together. We're on the forefront recognizing this. We have a mayor, we have a council that wants to do more. I look forward to what we're going to be able to do in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. And next we want to bring up a local legend of sorts for what he's tried to do in the community and his own experience and willingness to give back. Jeff Holland from Endorphin Power Clinic Company.
Thanks for asking me to speak. I consider this to be a service to my community, and there's a lot of meat on the bone that we've been talking about right now. And you know, at the point of recognition, we become accountable. I talk about that with my clients and my residents, and I think we've recognized there's a problem, and now we have to be accountable to that. And being accountable is not desensitizing our children to extreme gun violence. Being accountable is not teaching them how to hide and how to adopt military tactics because there's an active shooter. That's not being active. That's desensitizing an entire population to the violence. And so what you've heard prior to me coming up here is a bunch of people with solutions, but they don't become action until we get behind them and let our leaders know that we're serious about this. And I don't think there's anything more serious than protecting the youth of our communities. And obviously that ties in several areas with behavioral health and substance use disorder, and not being a question of morality, but a health issue, as you just heard. And I have yet to meet a very young child, when asked what they want to be when they grow up, has stated that they want to be an actively using drug addict, in and out of prison, in and out of jail, in and out of the emergency room, in and out of hospitals, and so forth. And so, again, don't be desensitized to things that are not providing logical, rational, and solutions to the problems that we're facing. When Mr. Torres talked about adverse childhood experiences, that's traveling very far up the stream to address a problem. And I know when we address these problems, we want to see solutions right away. But it doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't happen that way. We are farmers, and we are planting seeds. If we don't water those seeds, they will never sprout. And we may never get to stand under the shade of that tree and enjoy that fruit, but if we don't plant it, then there's never going to be a tree to provide the shade. And so what we're talking about now is at least trying to plant the seed. So I hope everybody understands that the solution is not desensitization of gun violence. It's not a morality issue when it comes to addiction. And it's going to take all of us with a collective voice to make sure that the people who are not acting finally listen. And I encourage everybody, no matter where you stand on this issue, to at least have a voice in this. Reach out to the people that you know are leaders in your communities, community organizers, politicians, whatever you feel is going to make a difference, and make your voice heard. But what we're experiencing now in terms of the fentanyl crisis and gun violence across our country as well as in our community is absolutely unacceptable. And so at this point of recognition, I think we all become accountable. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Part of this is also about protecting civil rights and across a number of aspects. And we're fortunate in our city to have an Office of Civil Rights headed by Tori Jacobus. Let's hear from her. Tori.
Good morning. Mayor Keller, thank you for gathering us here today to talk about these important and critical matters. Thank you all for taking the time out of your morning to gather to be a part of the solution in preventing and reducing crime, specifically domestic violence in our community. For far too long, domestic violence has been treated like a problem that only belongs behind closed doors. Not anymore. The Keller administration has recognized that domestic violence is a major public health problem in our community. As many as 20% of homicides in the last few years were related to domestic violence. As many as 1 in 3 women and 1 in 7 men are survivors of domestic violence in our community. This is not a small problem, and it's very clearly one that affects all of us in some way. The City of Albuquerque has stepped up and developed several strategies to reduce and prevent domestic violence. Mayor Keller created a domestic violence task force made up of community members from the advocacy community, service providers, APD, AFR, and survivors of domestic violence. You've actually heard from some of those task force members today, including our Representative Pamela Herndon. Like the Metro Crime Initiative, the task force spent several months creating specific, measurable, and actionable recommendations for the City of Albuquerque that the City of Albuquerque can and should take in reducing and preventing domestic violence. Last year, the task force delivered 39 recommendations to Mayor Keller that focused on improving coordination between city agencies and community agencies, changes to city ordinances and policies, and increasing services by optimizing grant funding. We hired a domestic violence and gender-based violence coordinator, Isis Roybal, who's here today, to work directly on carrying out these recommendations and to continue to turn to the community to meet their needs. The focus on domestic violence within the Metro Crime Initiative will incorporate and build on these recommendations to reduce violence and save lives. Thank you again for spending your morning to help create a stronger Albuquerque.
Now, to continue on the domestic violence side of this equation, we also are joined by the head of the Coalition Against Domestic Violence, Teresa Garcia. Teresa?
Thank you very much for inviting us today. Good morning. My name is Teresa Garcia, and I currently work for the New Mexico Coalition Against Domestic Violence as the Director of Training and an active community member here in Albuquerque, New Mexico. At NMCADV, we work to achieve a coordinated local, regional, and statewide response to domestic violence through a collaborative network of member programs that consist of domestic violence service providers and other allied organizations and individuals. We also have Ana and Marta here from Enlace Comunitario, who are members of our one of our programs. Our coalition currently has 32 direct service domestic violence organizations who support survivors and their families with resources when they are ready. The coalition also provides trainings across the state of New Mexico and currently expanding trainings nationwide. Several of our programs also offer battering intervention programs for offenders up to 52 weeks. We understand that domestic violence is a social problem, bigger than the behavior of individuals. Therefore, our work occurs on 2 levels simultaneously. We help individuals recover, and we work to change the conditions that promote violence. We believe in individual and community accountability to create safer communities. It is known that in communities who speak against domestic violence, less violence occurs. So we must continue to educate our communities and work collaboratively. Outside of working for NMCA-DV, where I'm now speaking as a community member and survivor of domestic violence, I currently sit on the Southwest Steering Committee to address domestic violence in the Southwest, where it has the highest rates of domestic violence than any other community in Albuquerque. We must also take the moment to recognize that June is Pride Month, where our LGBTQ+ community has and is experiencing high rates of gender-based violence. As a community member, it is important that all organizations are working together to find ways to better support survivors. It takes up to 7 times for a survivor to finally leave, where most survivors do not have an advocate and are pro se. It is also important to continue educating our communities on domestic violence and hopefully change the narrative to not ask, why didn't she just leave? The most dangerous time for a survivor is when they decide to leave. We must recognize the barriers there are when leaving that prevents the survivor from doing so, such as language barriers, needing translation, fear of immigration status, not having the financial means to leave, where most survivors are not the breadwinners, and create resources that are easily accessible for survivors within the judicial and legal system. Domestic violence is not just physical, it's emotional, mental, psychological, as well as financial. Domestic violence does not discriminate. Anyone can be a victim of DV regardless of race, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or economic status. We invite you to please head to our website at nmcadv.org to find a program near you, or call us directly at 505-246-9240. If you need to speak with an advocate or victim services, you are also welcome to please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE, which is 1-800-799-7233. Thank you so much.
Now, we're also very fortunate to be joined by the chairwoman of the House Judiciary Committee. And Representative Chasey is an extraordinary legislator. She's been at this for quite some time. She's one of the few people, I think, in the state who understands 2 important connections. Number one, that important connection between root causes and also consequences of those root causes. Also, someone who understands the connection between the city of Albuquerque and the rest of the state of New Mexico. You know, we call this the Metro Crime Initiative because literally all these individuals, we all live here physically, and we do this work every day together. But we also know this is absolutely, unfortunately, more than ever before, it is a statewide issue, whether it's because of the fentanyl trafficking, whether it's because of the state investments that come into early childhood and adverse situations for our youth, or it's just writing state laws. These are statewide issues, and that's why we're so grateful to have a chairwoman of the House Judiciary Committee representing right here in the heart of Albuquerque. Representative Chairwoman Gail Chasey.
I want to begin and end by thanking Mayor Keller for convening the Metro Crime Initiative last year and continuing it this year and inviting me to participate. But first, I really want to extend my deepest condolences to Benny's family. I am so sorry that you have to be part of this. And even had you not had to be part of this, we would still need to be advocating for other children. It broke my heart. My heart broke again with Uvalde, and I know all of us feel the same way. I've been on the hit list of the National Rifle Association since 2002, when I had a bill that I was carrying in the legislature. You can survive when you do that, but maybe not when you're a kid in a school. And I'm not afraid of them, and I think that we really need to look to solutions. And Representative Herndon, thank you for your leadership in this area. And I think we'll be able to get that bill passed. I'm not a prognosticator, but I think the odds are good. The Metro Crime Initiative saw a major legislative success last year. I sponsored for the third year, the Violence Intervention Program. And the mayor mentioned we got some major funding for that in the legislature this year. And we had an opportunity to explain the program in the debate on the House floor, which was quite interesting. I really want to compliment the mayor's staff and advisors who were helping me with that and answering the questions, some of which seemed ridiculous at the time. But the proliferation of guns throughout the country is true here in New Mexico. Guns are easy to acquire and unfortunately not as easy to prevent as the use of the guns. But we are invested in the violence intervention program, and we know that early intervention and prevention is possible, not just for children, but for adults. And it's enjoyed remarkable success here and in other communities throughout the country. So I'm very hopeful. We're going to have to be tenacious in sticking to our position and making sure that we take every opportunity we have or can to prevent gun violence, not simply just to live with it and clean up after the fact. And so, Mayor Keller, thank you for initially investing in the VIP, the Violence Intervention Program. Long before you brought it to me, the city had started working on it and realized some very significant results. And I expect that the continuation of the Metro Crime Initiative is going to yield more solutions that we can work together on in this state, this community, the city, the county, and the state of New Mexico. We have common challenges, and we will be seeking common solutions and real solutions. And I look forward to participating in the MCI again with an eye towards those solutions. I do co-chair our interim legislative committee on courts, corrections, and justice, and we meet in the summer and in the fall, and I'm confident that my colleagues will be interested in what we're doing. And so keep up the good work. I look forward to participating with you. And Mayor Keller, thank you again for your continued leadership in bringing us together in this initiative.
Well, thank you so much, Chairwoman, and that is a good segue into talking about what's next. And so first I want to mention that the MCI-1 carryover topics that we're going to be discussing include the red flag amendments. And we've seen this with Uvalde, this notion that red flag laws are best practices and are good, and then it's like, well, we have them in New Mexico. Newsflash, they do not work. They are not effective. We have to change those so they are usable and workable, regular for our law enforcement system and our civil rights system to be able to use them. So that is going to be at one of the top agenda items that we're looking at. We're also looking at a shared data platform. This, again, can sound a little bit dry in a sense that what's the connection? But look, all of these cases, and especially when you look at things like domestic violence, childhood issues going through CYFD and so forth, data is a huge stumbling block for part of the criminal justice system, as is tracking backlogs. You know, there is no way to actually understand the delayed justice issues that are happening at different levels of the courts or the corrections system because we don't have a shared database for that, even with our own police departments. So that's something that we're going to be talking about once again. As we mentioned, too, the notion of access to handguns in the home, which is known as, of course, the Benny Hargrove bill, is going to be at the top of the agenda this year. And we are going to continue to look at pretrial detention. We know it was controversial last year, and it doesn't matter. We have case and case after case, victim and victim after victim, lined up, ready to tell you that the current system does not work. And so we'll absolutely be looking at that again. Now, the second session is going to include a lot more topics with respect to gun violence and access to weapons coming out of what's happening all across the country to make sure that we're synced up with Washington and their policy changes as well. So session 1 is going to be on July 19th. It's going to be 10 to noon. We're going to send all this information out publicly as we did before, and that's going to focus on guns. Session 2 is going to focus on drugs and behavioral health. That's going to be from 9 a.m. to noon on August 16th. In between these meetings, there's going to be separate subcommittee discussions as well as connections with Representative Chasey's committee and the Courts in Criminal Justice and Courts Corrections Coordinating Council. That again is another sort of ongoing monthly triage already in our community. We're going to make sure those are connected this year. And then session 3 is also going to focus on especially domestic violence on September 20th from 10 a.m. to noon. We'll be sharing all the locations, different ways to join, both in person and virtually. And of course, we'll have all the summaries and so forth online. We want to, I think, end with 2 points. Number one is that just like before, really frankly, before we started the Metro Crime Initiative, almost everyone here was working hard on crime and on their particular area of expertise. That is not in question. And so when people say in our community, no one's working on blank or no one's working hard, I just want to acknowledge every single person who's here today, from law enforcement to community advocates, for the work that they do every day. That's what they've been doing. What MCI does is it is essentially forcing us to do that work together and to have a shared agenda going forward. That's what's different, and that was, I think, so powerful last time. Now, I also want to share who's going to be organizing this. It's going to be basically the same individuals as before, but one is, of course, our senior policy advisor for the Albuquerque Police Department, Damon Martinez, our former U.S. attorney. He's out. He's a reservist, and I think he's on his reserve duty this week. He'll be working on this from one side. Also, as was mentioned earlier, our chief of policy, our deputy chief of staff for policy, Eric Griego, is going to be a newcomer to this process this year. We're fortunate he's back at the city, of course, a former city councilor and a former state senator. So welcome needed horsepower for this effort. And then there's going to be all the partners that we mentioned before, as well as lots of other specialists in different areas from law enforcement, APD, and of course from throughout our criminal justice system. And I think I want to close by saying this. Our representative mentioned the Violence Intervention Program, the VIP program. And I just want to tell you, I think, an example of yet again why it's so important to have this discussion happen. When I came into office, I said, well, what are we doing about violence intervention? And actually, it was our district attorney who's like, why aren't you doing violence intervention? And I said, at the time, I didn't even know what it was. And so I committed to him that I would learn up. And what we, of course, both learned is that you got to have a police department doing that because it's fundamentally a police activity with a lot of other partners. But that is one of many, many examples where that idea was really born out of a conversation between Raul and I. That's it. And the question is, how do those conversations happen dozens of times throughout a summer in a time of desperate need for our city? That's what the MCI is about. It's about those connections happening at every level, at the elected level, but also at the staff level. And then it's about being able to execute on those and not having to wait 4 more years down the road to do it. So with that, we're going to wrap things up. And we certainly can take questions, but because of the number of folks here, what I would ask is that Rebecca's here from APD and Dan Hirone, I think the media knows them. If you want to talk to anyone or have questions, just talk to them. I know I'll stick around as many others were. So with that, I want to thank everyone for coming, especially the Hargrove family. And I hope we can bring some amount of justice to what you've been speaking to today. Thank you.